Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. This week on the show, James Beam, the president of TD Private Client Wealth, is with me for a bit of a what the heck is happening in the world right now and how can advisors help their clients make sense of it all type of conversation. Jim really brought some refreshing insights on topics ranging from information overload to the gap between what people think is happening and what is actually happening. And of course, he touched on the impact of AI and some other technologies as well. This is an amazing episode. You're absolutely going to love it. Jim is fantastic, man. I really would love to have him on another episode sometime soon. Okay, before we get rolling, if you haven't done so already, make sure you click that follow or subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, the YouTube, so wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford everywhere on the socials, or you can just swing on by finservemarketing.com and use that little contact form there. Love to hear from you. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Jim Beam. Well, Jim Beam, wonderful to see you. Welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast.
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic to have you, sir. Well, I tell you what, it's kind of funny. I make these show notes before the podcast. I'm like, okay, here's kind of an outline of the things we're going to be talking about, and I started teeing up the whole notion of like, when I got my start in this industry, and I'm starting to feel like I'm old now, but I'm the last member of the group of adults who started their careers, became adults before the internet became a thing. Like I entered the workforce in 1994 and nobody had internet access on their computer at their desk or whatever. And then suddenly we had email and you had to go to these classes to learn how to use email in the workplace and all that type of stuff. But what's really funny about that, number one, today I had an old guy thing done at the optometrist. Went to the optometrist, had my eyes dilated. So I'm not sure if you zoom in, my pupils are massive. But the other funny thing is, if I think back to that first job that I had, I used to work the 4 to midnight shift, and people would call in to request the closing price for their funds or their portfolios because you couldn't just go online and see what the closing price was, or they'd request a prospectus. Back then people got their information from Money Magazine, Wall Street Journal, Kiplinger, and so forth. And heck, even CNBC was pretty new on the street. But today there is no end to the flow of information and the frankly misinformation that we're getting about investing. So I thought we'd launch today because, you and your team pitched this idea of talking about information technology, talking about kind of this rise of, everything all the time stuff. So how can clients and advisors avoid information overload?
Yeah, great question. And by the way, I'm right there with you. I think when I started my career, it was like cell phones just starting to come on the scene. Same thing with email. It's a totally different world right now. Look, everything's in your face at all times, and it never shuts off. So when we think about when we think about sifting through that, look, it's not easy to stay focused on the items that matter. I think there's a lot coming at us at all times, and from a market perspective, right now, it's really 3 things: it's jobs, it's the Fed and policy, and it's corporate earnings. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. There's a lot of information in the headlines, whether it be geopolitical or corporate news that pops, right? Hear it every day. Twitter changing its symbol to X, those type of things. They'll be in front of us all the time. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for investors to understand the source and understand what really matters. If we just rewind, I'll call it 14 months or so, obviously on the geopolitical front, Russia, Ukraine, big news. That impacted the market because it impacted commodities. It impacted supply chains, already weakened supply chains. But then you fast forward to the geopolitical news in Russia that happened a few weeks ago, and there was really nothing that came of it coming out of the weekend because it wasn't going to impact the market. I think oftentimes there is a lot of noise and have some short-term market volatility, but long-term doesn't really have a whole lot of an impact.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that. And uh, I think the way you phrased it, or the thing you touched on there, that uh, is we get information and we process it more rapidly now. Like we're getting it in real time. Number one, like, so it's no longer like, oh, guess what happened yesterday? Like, no, we all know it's breaking news. It's on the Twitter or X, I guess now, or Threads, whatever social media platform you're using. It's happening live in your face. And so not only are the institutional markets processing it quicker, like, what does this mean? Let's digest this. And so you might see a shock, you might see the markets dip until people figure it out. But I think retail consumers or financial consumers are figuring this stuff out a lot quicker and digesting and deciding what it means for them. But one thing I wonder if you have a take on is the concept of, like, well, as an example, I mentioned I went to the eye doctors, right? When I go to a doctor now, especially if there's something wrong with me, I don't wait to go to the doctor to ask the doctor, like, hey, what might be happening with me? I've gone online, I've Googled some stuff and and hopefully I've landed on a reputable place like WebMD or some other place that at least, is curated and has some insight to it. But increasingly, financial consumers are coming from the TikToks of the world and so forth, and they're getting stuff from places that might not have all their best interests at heart. It might not be curated from the smartest people. How do you offer guidance to advisors and people who are interacting with TD about, hey, be careful what you're consuming?
Yeah, look, I think the most important thing, there's no doubt about it, is that helping our customers identify their financial goals, their wants, their wishes, whatever that may be. That's where it starts, right? And I think that when you think about all the tips that everyone receive, whether, like you said, from TikTok or from their Twitter feed or from some news aggregator, whatever it may be, it's hard to synthesize that and really delineate what's good, what's not. I think for us helping clients, that's the most important thing. It's helping them identify their goals and then marry that to a really strong and well thought out investment strategy. I think that's what wins the day long term. And then helping remove the emotional context of what we just talked about, which was the headline. Look, there's always news. Yeah. There's always hot topics. There's always new technology. I'm sure we're going to dive into that today a little bit. Whether it be crypto that was new a few years ago, all the way through the AI phase that we're kind of in front of right now. It really comes down to, what do I want to do with my money, and how am I going to achieve that?
Yeah. I love the fact that you mentioned helping people process the emotions on it. We had did another podcast a few months ago, and we were talking about the concept that, like, money is all about emotion, right? It's because, yes, it's got utility and it has objective utility to it in your life. But the way that you interact with it is all emotion driven, right? Like, at some point in time, even if that emotion is like confidence and stay the course type of an emotion, we all react one way or the other. And having that calm hand at the wheel as a financial advisor who can help talk you off a ledge if necessary, or help kind of maybe push you a little more to be a little more aggressive to achieve the things you want to achieve in life, is really important. So I think that's a really smart thinking on your behalf to say, look, talk to your financial professional. Make sure you're not just digesting this stuff in a vacuum.
Yeah, it's fast and furious, right? It's it almost in some regards can become paralyzing if you think about how much information is at your fingertips. So yeah, I think it becomes easier if you have a target that you're trying to achieve, right? Yeah. And then every decision you make over the long term is based on whether or not you're going to achieve that outcome. And I think that's, if we apply that in our everyday lives, right? And whether it's mapping out a route where we're going, or, to your point, going to the doctor, you went to the doctor, right, for a reason. It's the same thing with investing. It's really just looking at an outcome and trying to achieve it. And I think that don't get me wrong, it's not always easy. There's bumps in the road along the way, but I think that's the gift that we can give people as advisors to really help them achieve those outcomes.
And it's funny that you just boil it down to like, hey, having goals and talking about those goals and making sure that you are checking in on your progress to those goals. And it sounds so simple, right? And I think most advisors are like, yeah, of course, that's what we do. But it's funny, it's really easy to drift away from that and get into a whole bunch of other conversations. It's like at the end of the day, you want to consistently be asking the client, okay, where do we want to go? Why do we want to go there? What are we doing to make sure we get there? And by the way, going to this goal has a trade-off. You might be sacrificing these other opportunities, right? So as an example, I always use the example like, you could make a decision if you want to retire early, but that might mean sacrificing some of the fun while you're young, right? Or you're gonna have to be way more risky. You have to put more of your assets in risky assets in order to have them do heavier lifting if you don't want to save as much and you still want to try to retire early, right? So there are all these levers that we can pull, but as you point out, it all comes down to like, what is it that you want to do?
Yeah. What do you
Right?
want? Yep. What do you want? What do you want to do? We'll help you
Yeah.
get there. But that's so critical.
Yeah.
We are summing it up to, a few words, maybe, easier said than done. But I do think that skill set that an advisor brings to the table, can really be helpful. And I think it's a thoughtful
Yeah.
approach. And again,
Yeah.
it's all encompassing. It's understanding our customers, their preferences, and taking the time, because it's not something that happens quickly, right? It's engaging, having a trusting relationship, and then you have earned the right to be able to have those important conversations. The investment piece of it is the outcome. The investment piece is helping them achieve their goals. In some regards, it's commoditized. It's all the other work that's done on the front end. I think that's the real value add.
No, I 1,000% agree. Like, I might have said this about 100 million times on this podcast and others. It's a relationship based business. We say it all the time, right? I mean, look, everybody has the same stocks, bonds, and mutual funds available to them for the most part. If you're a financial advisor, regardless if you're an RIA, an independent broker dealer engagement, or you're in a wirehouse, you have the same universe of investments that you can make available to your clients. That's not why they chose you,
That's
because everybody sells the same stuff, right? They're choosing you because of you, how you made them feel, how confident they feel, or how you made their spouse feel in the meeting. Like, that your spouse looked at you and said that this is the person I want to work with, whatever that is. Heck, back in my financial advisor days, I was once called a marital compromise, right? Because one one of the clients was a real risk tolerant dude, and he wanted to be more aggressive, and he was fine just swinging for the fences and doing things on his own. His wife, my other client, equal partner in the client relationship, she was like, I don't trust that you know what you're doing, right? So we decided to have a marital compromise and bring Mike in to talk about some things. So it is really interesting. It's so important that that relationship is there, because I think you correct me if you see it a different way, but like, when you have a great relationship with your client, it opens up new possibilities, right? Because suddenly they trust you enough to ask you questions or to posit what ifs that they might not have ever thought of on their own. They suddenly, oh, well, what do you think about this, Jim? Like, what would you do in this scenario? Or how could we accomplish this? We never really talked about having a vacation house, but now we're thinking about it. Is that the type of thing you encourage advisors to do when it comes to like the relationship building process?
Yeah, Mike, I think it's natural. It's a natural evolution. You've done well for a client when you're their first call when they're making a financial decision or something that they may not even recognize that you should be advising them on, right? If it's purchasing a car, should I lease or should I buy? It's should I take a home equity line of credit to, purchase an investment property? Or hey,
Yeah.
you're invited to my daughter's wedding or my son's wedding. Those absolutely, those are the the types of relationships that you want to have with a client, because it means you've earned their trust and you're a trusted advisor. And at the end of the day, that's going to help you help them, right? So yeah, I think I think you've nailed it. That's spot on, and we can all aspire for that.
I love the way you phrase that in terms of like, developing that trust and being the type of person that they invite to the wedding and so forth. And that kind of leads me into one of the topics you teed up in the prep call that I wanted to dive into here, because I frankly never heard anybody phrase it this way. You mentioned that there is a gap between what people think is happening and what is actually happening. And, there's a wide spectrum of like how that is. I mentioned misinformation at the beginning of the podcast, but I think that's one nefarious super tail end of the spectrum of how people get a clouded vision of what is actually happening in the world. I wonder if you could dive into the topics, like what were you seeing there, and how are you advising advisors or recommending that advisors tackle this gap? Because it is a real deal. Like people have this idea, like here's what's happening in the world, and like, nope, that's not rooted in anything other than I don't know where you got that idea from.
Yeah, I think it's so we can take it any direction you want. I think that the context of the comment from me was, clients judge us every month when they open up their statement, they look at their balance. And what we just talked about, what they read in the news. So you've got some pretty strong headline noise out there, geopolitical tensions in multiple areas of the globe, high inflation, a really aggressive Fed, corporate earnings maybe not as strong as one expected. So there's this backdrop of what I'll say, negative news. And then you open your statement every month and it's climbing. And I think at quarter end, the S&P was up maybe 17%. So really tell me what's happening is what some of the questions we get from our customers and our advisors as well. And look, when I think about the backdrop of what's going on, and again, the context, the comment I made, at the end of May, the 7 largest tech companies in the U.S. by market cap, all the big names, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, Tesla, they're all of them are in the news for something, whether it be artificial intelligence chips or Elon Musk doing something with Tesla or Twitter or Boring Company, whatever it may be. And,
right.
and we hear about them all the time. They were actually responsible for the entire index gains for the year. Those 7 companies. At the end of the quarter, those companies represent about 25% of the index. They represented 75% of the return. So you have this very narrow breadth rally going on. And I think that speaks to a little bit of caution. The market is generally considered healthier and rallies typically more sustainable when more stocks rise together. So when you have 7 companies driving all the performance with the backdrop of what we just spoke about, with an aggressive Fed, corporate earnings pressure, slowing global growth, that's the gap that I was speaking about. So look, it doesn't mean that the markets won't go up over the long term. I think we've seen that throughout history, and having a well-diversified portfolio helps you achieve your goals for sure. But right now, there's no doubt it's confusing out there, I'm sure, for investors.
Yeah. Well, for sure. And it's interesting to me. I had this interesting experience yesterday, and I had to do one of those use every fiber of my self-control not to comment, because you don't want to get into the comment section sometimes. But somebody posted a thing about look at all these baby boomers dancing in the streets, how happy they are. They bought their house for $40,000 back in 1980, and now they're selling it for $2 million or whatever. And there was a couple of undertones there that I was like, there's some. If you don't know better, this could be a challenge for you, right? Like as a as somebody who's looking at this information, number one, you'd think that, oh, boomers are somehow evil, like they were this giant cabal of boomers who like are taking advantage of the world. Like they just live their lives like you and I are living their lives. They bought their house and they bought their house. Uh, so there's that piece. But the other piece was like, well, you're also ignoring some inflation things. Like, yes, house prices went up dramatically. Well, a dollar in 1980 is worth $3.69 today. So if you just invested and only got a return on inflation, you'd have close to 4 times your money today. But if you include the stock market and other investment opportunities, you might have done very, very well for you. And that's the type of thing when you said the whole people say there's a gap between what they think has happened and what has actually happened. I often find the average financial consumer lacks the ability to know these things because they didn't study finance, right? They don't have access to a chief economist at whatever firm they work at. And so to me, it seems like this is a role of an advisor to help add clarity as well to like what is really happening in the world and to, I guess, be willing to confront some of these, because nobody likes conflict, but you do have to sort of confront a potential harmful mindset that your client might be getting, right?
Yeah, look, I think it's a little bit of the herd mentality too.
Mm.
At your cocktail party or at your neighbor's house, you hear about the wins. Everybody
That's
hears
true.
about the wins. What you don't hear about is, the loss or the mistake. And I think that cuts across all of life. People like to talk about themselves. They like to probably view themselves as successful in some way or something. So that's the story that you get. Yeah, I think that the same holds true with investing. Look, there's a lot, as you mentioned, there's a lot to sift through, and there's no doubt that an advisor can help with that. A good advisor can certainly help with that.
What would help? That's it. Exactly. So let's kind of continue down this rabbit hole of technology and like what's happening because beyond the dizzying array of information sources that clients and advisors are swimming in like in a near 24/7 basis, technology as a whole is changing how we work and live, and frankly that lends credence to why you saw those tech stocks really driving the S&P along the way. I mean, 4 years ago, there were lots of people who had rarely, if ever, used Zoom or FaceTime or any other form of video conferencing solution, period. Like just, forget professional engagement. They just never used it. But now, like some of your clients and some advisors prefer Zoom meetings to in-person or meetings, right? Because it's just like, look, way more efficient for me if I'm the advisor to not have to, block off all these time slots in person or drive over to your house, and vice versa. The client would rather just shoot the breeze with you on the screen. What are some other new technologies that you and the team are seeing have an impact in shifting the way that advisors are serving their clients? I mean, Zoom's a pretty big one, right? Or whatever they're using, Teams or whatever. Have you seen any other technologies kind of starting to leak in that are transforming some stuff?
Yeah, I knew we were on a new journey for technology when I had one of my elderly clients call up and ask me, to buy some Bitcoin.
Oh, okay.
We obviously we don't, at TD we don't offer cryptocurrencies to our clients, but we are very much interested in blockchain technology. So yes, I think the pandemic was very transformative when you think about digital adoption.
Yeah.
Right. That I mean, we saw complete shifts in consumer behavior. I think some of it's normalized, but it really accelerated that adoption. And when I think about from our business perspective, obviously we're very much zoomed in on the client, our client experience, their end to end journey, our colleague experience, and what how they operate every day. Right, we're at the mindset that if we can help our advisors deliver better advice, our clients are going to be happier. If we give our clients a frictionless experience with us, then they'll be happier. And that's what it's all about, serving our clients better. But look, there's no doubt that I'll say big data, emerging technologies from that. I'm sure we'll talk about artificial intelligence, but
Yeah.
robotic process automation, right?
Yeah.
You think about some of the mundane tasks that that you needed to have a lot of people just kind of checking a few boxes, maybe 15 years ago. Well, there's machines doing that now for validation, for making sure that you adhere to the regulatory requirements, to make sure that that you're above board, or there's no fraud. Um, uh, Big data and analytics. We want to understand our own data so that we can make more informed business decisions, and we also understand our consumer preferences, how they want to interact
Yeah.
with us. We talked a lot about it today. Some clients want digital advice, some want face to face, some want a hybrid. But if we don't know that, you can't just make those determinations by asset size anymore, right? That was 25 years ago. 20 years ago, you would say, oh, if you have a lot of money with us, you deserve more service. Well, okay, that may work in some cases, but you also may have a very wealthy client that wants to interact with you digitally. So you've got to be prepared for that. Obviously, we just talked about blockchain technology. I think it's here. That ledger, what I'll say, the transparency that creates from a transaction standpoint that's tracked and verified, that's a potential changer for the investment business. I mean, you think about all the trades that happen, the settlement of trades, right? Those are all things that are ledger like. So a lot's have evolved. And then I think about know your client. I know that's kind of boring, but it's certainly it's certainly something that we have to take very seriously, given the cybersecurity and fraudulent backdrop this kind of world we live in today. I think the next phase is digital identities, becoming a reality, which enhances security and which helps us all. So there is a lot of
Yeah.
emerging technologies out there that we're trying to leverage to create a better
Yeah.
experience.
I love it. It was really interesting. You touched on something that has been one of those makes me happy things that I've seen over the last few years, and that is the democratization of high end stuff. You mentioned that, like, certain things were only available to high net worth or ultra high net worth clients at one point in time. Because they were very labor intensive things to do. It just took a lot of effort to make this solution available to you. And we're starting to see smaller RIAs be able to inch up into being almost like private office, family office like services for their clients, just because the cost of rendering some of these services have come down dramatically, right? It just used to be very difficult. Like, oh, that's all the hand holding, all the touch points and so forth. But some of this could be automated, right? Heck, even like solutions like the ability to see all of your accounts aggregated in one spot on your smartphone screen. That was brutally difficult to do and reconcile and so forth a little over a decade ago. But now it's starting to be very commonplace for an advisor to go, hey, if you want to hook up your bank account, you want to see your loans, your credit cards, and so forth, all in that, and whatever the app is, whether that app's provided via a TD or some other provider, it's becoming available. It's pretty amazing that this has happened like that quick.
Really
Yeah.
fast innovation. And look, before you had to build it yourself. You had to have a data center. You needed to have the people, and then you need to have the coders, technologists to be able to actually offer some of these solutions. And now everything's cloud based. So if you want to review your data, okay, you click a button. If you want to have some type of overlay on top of it that has a bunch of APIs and integrates everyone's investment balances from all over the world, just click a button. And that's changed. I think it's important for advisors to understand what's out there, what the landscape is, and what's available to them, and not be fearful of trying out new technologies. But I do
Yeah.
think data
I
aggregation is a big one. Cloud services, yeah, they're here to stay, and in some regard, will be table stakes for the future.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you say, like, don't be afraid to tinker with things. And frankly, also, don't be afraid to ask your clients, is this something of interest to you or that you value in your business, like, or your life? Like, would you like to have access to this? One of the things we hear on the show repeatedly and other places as well is that advisors are very concerned with connecting with the heirs of their clients, right? Because you just know how it is. If all of a sudden your clients are 75, 80 years old, there might be a day where you flip on your system and find out, where's that $2 million from, Jim and Joseph, and oh, it get transferred out. How did it get transferred out? Well, their heirs took over the assets and they never thought to call you. So
Yep.
developing relationships down into the younger generations is really important. But what if those people they don't meet your asset management, their AUM minimum to work with you? Well, there's now some of these lighter touch robo advisory type offerings that you can offer to those clients that allow them to have a base level of service. And then you can still talk to them maybe once a year or whatever. But you're starting to bring them in. And that's just a wonderful way of, connecting your business for the long term.
Absolutely. The largest generational transfer of wealth is about to happen over the next 10 years. I think the number is $80 trillion. So if we try and even wrap our arms around that, it is massive. I think it's critical, absolutely critical to be able to keep the next generation connected, right? Offer them a solution that is preferred by them, and serve them just like you would any of your other clients. Because if you forgo that, that's probably the largest opportunity that sits in front of all of us from
Yeah.
a financial services perspective, at least the greatest in history that we've ever seen. So I think it's critical, absolutely critical, to be mindful of the next generation and beyond, and offer services that will support them, help them. They can't be ignored. Can't be
Right.
ignored.
Yeah. I love it. 100% agree. Um, Speaking of the future in the long term here, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the kind of artificial elephant in the room. Artificial intelligence, AI, as everybody is probably sick of hearing by now, is poised to have an impact basically on every aspect of our lives in the coming years. And while I think financial advisors may be kind of shrugging their shoulders at it with I saw robo advisors, everybody was saying I was going to go out of business. That's actually complemented my business. And then they saw crypto, and some of them thought it was faddish, crypto and NFTs, and we see that that's kind of here to stay. And the book's still out on whether how big it's going to be, how big of an impact, if they're going to live up to the impact that people said. But um, I think AI, if you listen to industry experts, is a completely different animal, especially generative AI. Anyone who's seriously knowledgeable about technology is not only bracing for the impact, but they're starting to embrace it, right? They're going after it. Like, how can we, as you mentioned, tinker with this, get this into our business and use this to amplify our abilities? I think you mentioned in our prep call that 80% of the companies that reported earnings, and this might be more by now, they mentioned AI and machine learning and their thoughts on it as whether it was a threat or an opportunity. How are you and your team approaching AI, and what guidance are you sharing with advisors on what they should be doing or how they should be preparing themselves?
It's here to stay. That's what I'll
Yeah.
say. I mean, that's the key message. It will be transformative for the entire industry, and most likely all industries. When I think
Mm.
about uh, artificial intelligence, been born for a really long time. You think about humans and machines, a match made in productivity heaven, right? I think it's on the verge of actually being fully democratized. We talked about the access to information, access to investments, but I think artificial intelligence is also right there at the gates. Um, and I think, what we're looking at is an opportunity for sure. We're looking at how it could potentially, change every interface that employees and customers rely on. I think the most influential impact will be made in AI's ability to perform the cognitive functions we associate with human minds. And I think you talked about that. That's reasoning, perceiving, learning, interacting with an environment, problem solving, and creativity. That's kind of the next evolution. And I think that touches everything, not just financial services, marketing and sales, operations, IT, engineering, legal, compliance, you name it, research and
Mm.
development. I think at the end of the day, consumers are hungry for financial independence, and providing the ability to manage one's financial health is really going to be a driving force behind the adoption of artificial intelligence in personal finance. And listen, you may not even know that, or we may not even know that we're interacting with artificial intelligence. But if you have an iPhone or an Android, Siri and Alexa were built off artificial intelligence platforms.
Right.
Your first touch point with a corporation through customer service may be a chatbot. That's generative artificial intelligence.
Well, you mentioned an interesting thing. So I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of it's going to touch everything, but some of the areas where it's going to make the biggest strides is uh, repetitive tasks or a task that you have to do that takes a little longer than it should because you have to go digging for information, right? Think about that. So, as an example, emailing a client, uh, or writing a quarterly report for a client. Like, yeah, some of that is standardized. You press a button and it prints out the reports and so forth. But most advisors write some sort of like colorful language in there to say, hey, here, Mr. and Mrs. Client, here's some of the things that happened over the last quarter, and here's some things we want to talk about, whatever. AI models are getting smart enough where you could say, hey, go look through prior interactions with Mr. and Mrs. Client, pull that stuff out, take a look at their social media profile, give me some information on what's happened in their life. So basically summarize some stuff. Now that might be something you'd assign to an assistant, an actual human assistant, but we're getting to the point where some of these generative AI tools are going to be able to look through email. They're going to be able to look through social. They're going to be able to look through other systems and pull that together and craft is this good? Is this helpful for you? And that opens up a huge amount of opportunities for an advisor because I say this all the time. I think the average John Q. Public would be very surprised at how small the average wealth management firm is, right? Even a firm that has, 20, has $2 billion AUM is a really small business, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just might be 20 employees, right? 5 advisors and a whole bunch of staff members. Imagine what one person can do if they have all these tools. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's leaps forward, um, because you're right. Those labor intensive tasks that are really important and critical. I mean, that's a touch point with the client. That's amazing that you're going to send a quarterly piece or send something monthly. That's thoughtful. I think it's table stakes for our industry. But the fact that artificial intelligence can do it in 15 seconds,
Yeah.
whereas someone sifting through historical performance, looking at different sectors, trying to really formulate something, and how did what did that mean to you and your portfolio? What's your attribution? Can be done in a matter of clicks. I think the
Crazy.
human interaction will still be important. Um, you know, AI, artificial intelligence, is really based off of getting information off the internet, and we know how that works. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. So I think, coupled with the human touch and experience, it can be extremely, extremely powerful.
Yeah. I urge anybody who's listening or watching this episode of the show, just go start tinkering with it. Go to ChatGPT, Bard, which is Google's AI. There's several of them. There's Microsoft has like an image creator type uh, solution called Dolly, and it's presented in other. But just start tinkering with these things because you'd be amazed, right? Like you can ask it to some of these things to summarize this podcast I listen, or summarize this document and make it no longer than 500 words, and it'll do it. Now it is flawed; it's not perfect just yet, but it can get you going. You talk about saving some time. Like this just shrunk down, a couple thousand words into 500 words, and now I just have to go there and put my color on it. What a wonderful, cool thing. And to me, again, I've already dated myself. I got my start in 1994. I remember when I first started using a spreadsheet. Back then it was Lotus 123 at first, and Microsoft Excel came in. And when you saw how you could build the framework for a financial model once and then start changing variables and watch how it just populated throughout the Excel spreadsheet. Now that sounds like quaint today. People are like, yeah, Mike, I've seen a spreadsheet. But here's the deal. It was magic, right? Like I'm just think if you're in our generation, think about the first time you pulled up Google Maps on your phone and it got you where you wanted to go. Like that's not that long ago where you're like, oh my God, I no longer need paper maps. This is amazing. Think about how this has freed me up. That's the type of impact these tools are going to have for all of us in our lives. And the sooner you get out of the gate, starting to tinker with them, I think maybe the better.
Yeah, look, it was the pivot table. It was the pivot table for me, right? It was,
Yeah.
wow. Hold on, that was 1,000 lines, and now it's just a couple of lines. Yeah,
It's great.
look, I couldn't agree more. It will be transformative. There's no doubt that it's here to stay. I think I think the right thing to do is to try and understand it. Right, the same thing you would never offer. Again, we don't offer cryptocurrency, but you would never offer that to your clients without testing it, right?
Right.
Understanding what the technology is. So I think try and understand it. It's been around for a long time. I think the processing capability is getting a lot better to really push it along here. But big data and neural networks have probably been around since the late 50s, early 60s, at least the first iteration. So in some regards, it's been with us for a long time. I think it's just coming to life, if you will.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, a little comfort thing, because I hate doing this. I hate aging. The average age of a financial advisor, everybody says, is around 60, which means, like half are below 60 and half are above. Uh, I know some of this stuff sometimes, if you're not a deep technology person, can feel overwhelming to think about. But look, you don't need to really know how a car works to be able to drive a car and appreciate that it does some cool stuff for you. You don't need to know how your computer works to know, like, oh, I use this thing and it makes me productive and does all sorts of cool stuff. So same thing here. Again, start tinkering with the tools. Um, I know we're getting close to the end here, Jim, but one of the questions I like to ask people is, you know, what are some things that they're kind of geeking out on? Like, what's the thing that for you, you're like, oh, I not only can I not let this go, I'm just almost like obsessed with thinking about where this thing is going in the future. What's that thing for you? And I guess it could be you personally. This is what you're nerding out, or maybe the team, you and the team at TD that you're leaning in on super heavy.
Yeah, for us, I mentioned it before, and it's not to marginalize our business in any way. You think about investing, the same funds, same mutual funds. Everybody just kind of slicing up the pie has come a bit commoditized, right? So we are really, really zoomed in on goals based advice and goals based planning. It's really exciting for us because it's an enhanced discovery. It helps us understand really the root um, the root cause of some of our client concerns and issues, helps them identify their goals faster. So for us, it's been a big push, the last 3 years, and that's across the entire client, what I'll say, life cycle. You think about really
Mm.
trying to address client needs based thing, and then you look at legacy, right? And that's, what do you want to do with your money? What type of legacy do you want to leave? And stitching that together for our customers, it's been a personal passion of mine. Obviously, love investing, but as we know, investing is an outcome of a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
So we're really zoomed in on that experience for our customers, and goals based advice, I'll call it, and really marrying the two, making sure that whatever investments we're placing in for our clients really is aligned with what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. And it's, kind of like dovetail it with, that topic of AI and how smart some of these machine learning systems are coming. It's becoming possible for advisors to customize portfolios to align with uh, clients' values, the things that they think are important in their lives and their goals. Whereas that was really, really difficult before. We talked to an AI provider in the investment space in a previous episode, and they were talking about, like, they can help an advisor avoid, only have stocks in their portfolio that have certain representations on the boards, right, in their leadership. Because the AI tool can look through and see, okay, there's women representation, there's people of color on the board, there's LGBT representation, whatever. If that's the type of portfolio you want, now this tool makes it really easy to do that. Whereas before, if a portfolio manager had to do that manually, rough stuff, right?
Oh,
So
rough stuff, rough stuff.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's, look, it's industry screens, it's impact investing, as you mentioned, ESG.
yeah,
It's certain industry, right? Tobacco, firearms. Some people may want to invest in that, some may not.
that's right.
So absolutely, having that ability will be critical, again, to helping clients with their preference.
Love it. So We're at the end of our time today, but I think a lot of people are going to want to follow up with you because, well, this was awesome.
It's been wonderful. I appreciate you having me on, Mike.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Jim was amazing. Loved having him on the show. And I tell you what, a lot of work putting this episode together, not because Jim was a lot of work, but because technically we had some issues. And also, hey, getting somebody of Jim's caliber on the show takes a little bit of effort. So kudos to the team on Jim's side at TD for making all this possible. Wonderful having him on the show. And again, welcome back anytime. Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the show, if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and hit us up with any of those suggestions for topics or guests. Love to hear from you. Okay, that's it. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. See ya. Bye.